A young mother, broke and exhausted, drifts off on a stranger's shoulder mid-flight, only to wake and find her baby in his arms. But what happens after they land doesn't just change her life. It stuns the entire airport. Who was the man beside her, and why did he vanish before she could say thank you? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Los Angeles International Airport hummed with its usual chaos as the sun began to rise over the city. The early morning rush had already filled the terminals with impatient business travelers, anxious vacationers, and sleep-deprived families clinging to paper coffee cups. Among them, Keanu Reeves moved quietly through the crowd, unnoticed beneath a plain hoodie and a worn black backpack. He walked with the air of someone used to being invisible when he wanted to be. He wasn't flying private this time, not because he couldn't, but because he needed the space. The quiet discomfort of a commercial flight offered something rare to him: humility, humanity, and maybe, if he was lucky, a few hours of solitude above the clouds. He kept his eyes down, nodded politely to the gate attendant, and boarded early without drawing attention. Row 14, window seat. Middle of the plane, middle of the morning, middle of nowhere in his mind. Across the terminal, a different kind of journey was unfolding. Sarah was late. She had miscalculated how long it would take to get through security, especially with an 8-month-old baby in her arms, a diaper bag with a broken strap, and shoes that kept slipping off her tired feet. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as baby Noah's cries echoed through the gate area. A man in a business suit sighed audibly as she passed, and a woman muttered something under her breath about babies on planes. Sarah bit her lip and kept walking. She had learned not to respond. She had learned to keep going even when the stairs burned. Noah was hungry, but she had used the last of his formula before they left her sister's apartment. Her only hope was that he'd fall asleep soon after takeoff. She cradled him close and whispered a lullaby through clenched teeth as she made her way down the jet bridge. The flight attendant at the door offered her a tight smile. "Seat 14B?" she muttered, trying not to sound winded. "Middle seat, right side," the attendant nodded. As Sarah shuffled down the narrow aisle, passengers craned their necks to watch the commotion. A young mom, a fussy baby, and the unmistakable scent of baby wipes trailing behind. When she finally reached row 14, she exhaled shakily. The aisle seat was empty. The middle seat, hers, sat between a vacant spot and a man in a gray hoodie looking out the window. "Sorry," she whispered, clutching Noah tighter. The man turned slowly, offering a soft, unreadable smile. She didn't recognize him. "You're okay," he said gently, voice low and calm. "Take your time." Sarah eased into the middle seat, adjusting Noah carefully on her lap. The baby let out another small wail, drawing more annoyed glances from the row ahead. She avoided eye contact, her hands fumbling with the seatbelt and the half-zipped diaper bag. Diapers poked out awkwardly, and a teething toy dangled by a thread. Her cheeks burned. The man beside her didn't flinch. In fact, he shifted slightly to give her more room, angling his body away from hers. Not in discomfort, but to give her a sense of space. Most people would have scooted away in frustration. He just sat quietly, glancing at the baby for a moment before returning his gaze to the window. Sarah finally settled in, whispering apologies as she rocked Noah gently against her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said again. "He didn't sleep last night. Neither of us did." The man turned to her with the same calm expression. "No need to apologize." There was something about his voice, familiar in tone even if she couldn't place it, warm, measured. It had a kindness she hadn't heard from a stranger in a long time. Noah squirmed and whined, clearly agitated. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a bottle. Empty. She stared at it, her face falling. She had hoped there would be just a little left. Enough to settle him down, but nothing. Keanu noticed her glance. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. The plane began to taxi. As the engines roared to life, Sarah rocked Noah harder, trying not to cry herself. She could feel the pressure in her chest rising. The looks, the noise, the helplessness. A sharp jolt signaled the plane's acceleration. Noah screamed. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. And then, something strange. The man beside her leaned just slightly toward them and began to hum. A soft, low melody. It was barely audible over the roar of the engines, but Sarah felt it. A vibration of calm, like someone anchoring her in the middle of a storm. She looked over at him, startled. He gave her a small smile. "Sometimes sound helps," he said. "My sister used to hum that to me when we flew." Sarah blinked, unsure of what to say. She just nodded. Noah somehow began to quiet down. By the time the plane lifted into the air, the baby had stopped crying. Sarah stared down at him, stunned, then back at the man beside her. She didn't know who he was, but for the first time in days, she felt like she wasn't alone. The flight attendants made their first pass down the aisle, distributing drinks and small packets of pretzels. Sarah declined everything. She didn't have the energy to juggle a baby, a tray table, and a snack. Her body ached from stress and lack of sleep. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. The man beside her accepted a bottle of water, then turned to Sarah and gently nudged the extra one toward her tray. "Take it," he said quietly. "You look like you need it more than I do." She hesitated, then took it with a grateful nod. "Thank you." "No problem," he replied, then leaned back into his seat. Noah was now curled against her chest, calm but not yet asleep. She glanced at the man again, wondering how he'd managed to soothe her son better than she had in hours. Maybe it was just coincidence. Or maybe there was something different about him. "You fly a lot?" she asked, cautiously. "Sometimes," he said. "But I don't usually talk much on planes." Sarah nodded, a little embarrassed she'd broken the silence. "Sorry, I'm just nervous. It's my first time flying with him, and I guess I'm feeling out of place." "You're doing fine," he said. Simple words, but they landed heavily, like someone had finally told her she wasn't failing. As Noah's breathing deepened, Sarah leaned her head back. Her eyes fluttered shut for a second, just 1 second of rest. She could still hear the gentle hum of engines, the faint click of seatbelts and shuffling carts, but the weight of everything, being broke, being alone, being exhausted, started to slip away under the lull of altitude and quiet. And then, without meaning to, she drifted off. Her head tilted to the side, slowly falling until it came to rest on something solid and warm. Keanu didn't move. He sat still, his body supporting hers without hesitation. A few passengers noticed, eyebrows lifting at the sight of a young mother asleep on a stranger's shoulder, baby tucked between them like a secret. But Keanu didn't care. He looked out the window, watching clouds shift and sunlight scatter across the sky. For a man used to isolation and whispers, this felt oddly grounding. Real. Present. And then, slowly, without fanfare or thought, he closed his eyes too. Not asleep, just still. In that quiet stretch of sky between cities, no one recognized him. No one asked for photos or autographs. There were no directors, no cameras, no pressure. Just a man, a mother and her baby. And the flight continued. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow as the flight pressed on through the sky. Somewhere over Colorado, turbulence rumbled briefly, just enough to make Sarah stir awake. Her head lifted from Keanu's shoulder with a start, and in the groggy panic of waking, she blinked fast, confused by where she was and what she had done. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." Keanu raised a hand, calm and understanding. "It's okay, really." But it wasn't okay. At least not for her. Noah had started fussing again. Not full-on crying, just that restless whimpering that said he was too tired to be awake, but too uncomfortable to sleep. Sarah rocked him, bounced him gently, whispered his name. But nothing worked. The bottle in her diaper bag had somehow opened during the shuffle, and the last of the formula had spilled down one corner of the fabric. All that remained was a sticky mess and an empty bottle. "No, no, no," she muttered, digging through the bag again. "Please don't be out." The baby's cries sharpened. Sarah's panic rose with them. She could feel it, the stares from passengers, the silent judgment, the discomfort. Her face burned, her chest tightened. Noah squirmed harder, arms flailing, and she couldn't stop her own eyes from welling with tears. Her hands shook as she cradled him against her shoulder, patting his back. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Keanu watched for a long moment before gently leaning closer. "Would you like me to hold him? Just for a minute?" Sarah froze. "You don't have to." "I know," he said softly, "but I'd like to." Torn between desperation and maternal guilt, she hesitated, then nodded. Carefully, she transferred Noah into his arms. Keanu adjusted with quiet confidence, cradling the child like it was second nature. His large hands supported Noah's head and back, swaying gently in rhythm. Noah blinked up at him, briefly startled, but then nestled in and began to settle. Sarah let out a shaky breath, watching this man, this stranger, soothe her child when she couldn't. And for the first time in what felt like days, she let her body lean back, her head falling once again to the same shoulder. But this time, she cried. Not loud sobs, not messy wails, just the slow, silent tears of a mother too tired to keep holding it in. Keanu didn't flinch. He stayed perfectly still, rocking the child in his arms with a patience that felt almost holy. Noah's cries faded to soft breaths, and for a moment, the whole row became something sacred. The hum of the engines became the only soundtrack in that moment. Most of the passengers nearby were either asleep or wearing headphones. No one noticed right away, but one flight attendant, on her routine walkthrough, paused at the end of the aisle and tilted her head slightly. She hadn't expected to see what she saw. Keanu Reeves, unmistakable once seen up close despite the hoodie and beard, sat with a sleeping baby nestled against his chest and a young woman, clearly exhausted, resting against his shoulder. His arms cradled the child with a kind of quiet grace that stopped her in her tracks. He wasn't posing. He wasn't performing. In fact, he didn't even know she was there. There was something reverent about it, something deeply human. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. But after a long pause, she reached slowly into her pocket, pulled out a phone, and took a single photo. No flash, no sound. Then she slipped away, disappearing down the aisle like a whisper. Keanu remained focused on the baby, who now breathed in a slow, rhythmic pattern, his tiny fists curled against Keanu's chest. Sarah had gone completely limp beside him, her face streaked with drying tears. Keanu shifted slightly to give her neck more support without waking her. He rested the back of his head against the seat and closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift to memories he hadn't touched in years. He remembered being a kid on a long bus ride with his mother. She had been carrying 2 bags, trying to keep him calm, whispering soothing words into his ear while hiding the stress in her voice. He remembered the other passengers looking on with impatience, no one offering help, just silence and averted eyes. And now, years later, he held someone else's child while a mother slept beside him, worn thin by life. It was strange how the world worked. Moments like this didn't make headlines. They didn't sell tickets or trend on streaming platforms, but somehow they were the ones that mattered most. The ones that reminded him that all the roles he had ever played, assassins, rebels, lovers, warriors, none of them meant anything if he couldn't be human when it mattered. Noah stirred, pressing his face deeper into the curve of Keanu's arm. Keanu rocked gently again, adjusting his grip without breaking the rhythm. Another passenger across the aisle looked over, did a double take, and blinked in confusion. He nudged his wife. She leaned closer, stared, then mouthed, "Is that?" Keanu didn't see it. Or maybe he did and didn't care. His focus remained on the sleeping baby, on the mother beside him, and on the silence they all now shared. 30 minutes passed before Sarah stirred. It was subtle at first. A twitch in her fingers, then a slow lift of her heavy eyelids. She blinked twice, disoriented, before realizing her head was resting on someone's shoulder. Then she remembered where she was. Her eyes widened. She sat up quickly, brushing her hair from her face, heart racing. Her baby. Where was Noah? She turned and saw him, asleep in Keanu's arms. Her breath caught. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking with shame and panic. "I didn't mean to." Keanu gently shook his head, his tone calm and grounding. "It's okay. He's been perfect. You needed the rest." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. There was something familiar about him. The soft lines in his face, the steady presence. But it wasn't until now, as the hoodie slipped slightly down his shoulder, that recognition hit her. Her lips parted. "Wait, you're..." He gave her a small smile and shrugged. "Just a guy on a plane." She swallowed hard, emotions flooding back. "I haven't slept in days. I'm so sorry. I didn't even mean to lean on you." "You didn't do anything wrong," he replied. "We all fall sometimes. What matters is, who's there to hold us?" She looked down at Noah, still asleep, peaceful. Then back at Keanu. "I didn't expect kindness today," she said softly. "Not from strangers. People have been harsh." His eyes didn't flinch. "Sometimes it only takes one soft moment to remind us there's still good out there." The flight attendant returned, offering Sarah a bottle of water and placing a light blanket over her lap. She gave Keanu a knowing glance, but said nothing. Sarah watched the quiet exchange, realizing that this moment wasn't meant for public display. It was sacred. Sarah took Noah into her arms as he stirred and yawned, rubbing his eyes. She kissed his forehead, then looked back at Keanu, unsure how to express the weight of her gratitude. He sensed it anyway. He nodded once, a gesture that held more than words could. When the captain's voice came over the speaker, announcing the plane's descent into New York, the spell of the moment began to lift. But the impact had already rooted itself deep. Sarah didn't know it yet, but this flight would mark a turning point in her life. Keanu simply leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the quiet hold. Sarah jolted awake, her body tense, her mind racing. For a split second, she didn't know where she was. Her eyes darted around the plane cabin. The hum of engines, the faint clinking of a drink cart, passengers murmuring softly. Then she looked to her left and froze. Keanu was still there, and in his arms, Noah, fast asleep, safe, calm. Sarah gasped and sat up straighter, instinctively reaching out. "Oh my God, I didn't mean to..." "He's..." Her voice cracked, disoriented panic rising in her chest. Keanu gently turned to her, his voice a whisper. "I hope it was okay. He fell asleep a while ago. You both needed a break." Sarah blinked hard, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize I was..." He shook his head slowly. "You don't need to be sorry. It was just a moment of rest." She looked down at Noah, who shifted slightly, making a soft, cooing sound. Relief flooded her chest, followed by something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Warmth. A quiet moment passed. Sarah's breath slowed. "Do you need anything?" Keanu asked gently. "Water? A snack for him?" Sarah tried to answer, but the words got caught in her throat. Her lips trembled. She swallowed hard, turning her face slightly toward the window. He didn't press. That silence, that absence of pressure, it undid something inside her. Her voice cracked as she finally spoke. "I'm not just tired," she said. "I'm running." Keanu stayed still, listening. She swallowed again, the words burning their way up. I left Los Angeles with nothing but a backpack and my baby. I didn't know where to go. I just knew I had to go. Keanu's gaze never wavered. He didn't speak, just stayed. My ex, Sarah whispered. He's not the kind who hits you once and apologizes. He smiles while doing it. And the last time, he looked at Noah like... Her voice collapsed. A sob broke free before she could stop it. She covered her mouth. Noah stirred, and Keanu instinctively reached over to place a steadying hand on his back. I had to leave, she said, wiping her eyes. I don't have a job waiting, no one to stay with. I have $28 left, that's it. Keanu's eyes softened. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice even more. You're not alone anymore. Sarah looked at him, uncertain if she heard him right. But the calm in his face told her he meant every word. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to collect herself. The overhead light cast a gentle glow, but her shame felt far brighter. She had broken down in front of a complete stranger, unaware that the man next to her was one of the most famous faces in the world. But at that moment, Keanu wasn't a celebrity. He was just a man, holding her baby with more kindness than she'd known in months. I didn't mean to dump that on you, she said, her voice shaky. Keanu shook his head slowly. You didn't dump anything. You spoke your truth. Sarah looked down, her fingers tightening around the strap of her fraying diaper bag. Most people hear single mom and immediately pull away. Keanu glanced at Noah, then back at her. Then most people have forgotten what strength looks like. That made Sarah exhale in disbelief. Strength? I feel like a mess. I haven't slept in 2 days. I fed Noah applesauce out of a hotel coffee cup this morning. He smiled slightly, but his eyes didn't flinch. You kept him safe. You got on a plane without knowing what's next. That's courage, Sarah. Don't sell it short. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that. For a moment, she watched as Keanu gently adjusted Noah's blanket, tucking it around the baby's small shoulders. His movements were careful, deliberate, like someone who had done this before. You're good with him? Sarah said softly. Keanu looked at her, then back at the baby, and, for a heartbeat, a shadow passed behind his eyes. I had a sister, he said quietly. When she was sick, sometimes she'd let me hold her son. I think she liked knowing he felt safe. Sarah blinked. Is she? Keanu gave a small nod. She passed, a long time ago. There was something raw in his voice. Not open grief, but a wound tended quietly over the years. A silence that had learned to breathe. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. He nodded once. Thank you. They both sat quietly for a while, the hum of the plane surrounding them like a cocoon. Every so often, Sarah glanced sideways, as if making sure this wasn't some strange, gentle dream. Keanu finally broke the silence. Do you have any plan once you land? Sarah hesitated. A shelter gave me a number, but it's first come, first served. I'm hoping they'll have a spot when I get there. Keanu studied her for a moment, then reached slowly for his backpack beneath the seat. He didn't open it. He just rested his hand on top of it. If they don't, he said gently, we'll figure something out. Sarah's eyes welled again, but this time it wasn't fear that stirred her chest. It was the unfamiliar feeling of someone meaning it when they said you weren't alone. Sarah looked at him, eyes wide. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Keanu didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with that calm, steady presence she was still trying to understand. Then he spoke, his voice soft and even. Maybe I don't need to know everything about you to care. Sometimes, the world gives us a chance to show up for someone. That's enough. She stared at him, unsure what to say. That kind of answer didn't come from people who offered help with strings attached. It came from someone who knew something about pain, about being left, about choosing not to leave someone else behind. Sarah turned slightly toward the window, her hand resting protectively over Noah's foot. I never expected this. I just wanted to get away. I didn't think anyone would notice us, let alone you." Keanu smiled faintly. "I wasn't supposed to be on this flight either. My assistant booked it last minute because I wanted some quiet." He paused, then looked at her. Maybe this was the quiet I needed. Sarah exhaled, a trembling breath of relief and disbelief. Then she glanced down at Noah, peacefully asleep, his tiny hand curled around Keanu's hoodie string, and something in her chest softened. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a walking emergency. A voice on the intercom announced their descent into New York. People stirred around them, shifting trays, buckling seatbelts. But at their row there was stillness. Something sacred had passed between them. No headlines, no spotlight. Just a young woman who'd nearly broken, and a man who refused to let her carry it all alone. As the cabin lights dimmed, Sarah folded her hands in her lap and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Keanu nodded, gently passing Noah back into her arms. "You don't owe me anything." Sarah held her son tightly, nestling his cheek against hers. But even as the seatbelt light blinked on and flight attendants made their final rounds, a different kind of light had sparked between strangers in row 18. One forged not from fame, but from humanity. By the time the plane touched down, the baby stirred, blinking slowly. Sarah pressed a kiss to his forehead and looked at Keanu one last time. "Whatever happens next, I'll remember this," she said. Keanu's smile was quiet but certain. "So will I." The plane eased onto the tarmac with a soft bump, the landing gear humming as it met the ground. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and passengers stirred with the usual rustle of returning to reality. But for Sarah, reality still felt surreal. She sat holding Noah, who had just begun to wake, stretching in that lazy, innocent way babies do after a nap. His cheek was warm against her chest. Her eyes, however, were locked on the man beside her. Keanu unbuckled quietly and offered a small smile. There was no rush in his movements, no sense of celebrity urgency, only the grace of someone who was exactly where he needed to be. Sarah gave him a look filled with something she couldn't quite put into words. Gratitude, awe, disbelief. As the aisle began to fill with passengers reaching for overhead bins, Sarah struggled to balance her baby, diaper bag, and coat. Before she could even blink, Keanu stood and gently reached for the bag. "Let me help," he said. She hesitated but then nodded, handing it over. Her shoulders sagged with relief. She hadn't had someone willingly help in so long it felt like a foreign language being spoken again. They moved slowly down the aisle. Other passengers didn't seem to notice Keanu thanks to his hoodie and calm presence. He didn't seek attention, and the dim lighting made him blend in. Sarah still didn't know who he was, just that he had been kind, gentle, steady, and she didn't want to ruin that mystery. As they stepped into the jet bridge, Keanu paused. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. His hand was firm, but his eyes kind as he placed it in her palm. "Just in case," he said. She looked down and unfolded it slowly. It was a handwritten list. The top line read, "Places that helped someone I once knew." Below were addresses for women's shelters, food banks, and free legal aid. At the bottom was a short note, "You're not alone, even when it feels like it." Sarah blinked quickly, holding the paper close to her chest as they continued toward the baggage claim area. She didn't speak, afraid that if she tried, the emotion in her throat would crack wide open. Instead, she gave a small nod. Then, just before they separated, she leaned in and wrapped one arm around him in a quiet hug. Keanu didn't say anything, just returned the embrace for a brief second and stepped away. Sarah whispered, "Thank you," but by then, he was already walking toward the exit. She stood frozen for a moment, watching him go. The crowds bustled past, but the moment lingered. She held on to Noah tighter, clutching the list in her free hand like it was a lifeline, because in some ways, it was. That's when she heard her name echo across the terminal. "Ma'am, Sarah Whitaker." She turned around slowly, heart lurching in her chest. A uniformed airport security officer was approaching her, clipboard in hand. Sarah's pulse spiked. Panic spread across her chest like wildfire. Had something happened on the flight? Had she broken a rule without knowing? Was someone trying to find her? Her ex? Her grip on Noah tightened instinctively, and she took a step back, eyes darting toward the nearest exit. The security officer raised a calming hand. "Don't worry, ma'am. You're not in trouble," he said quickly, sensing her fear. "Someone just asked me to get this to you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored with her name written across the front in neat handwriting. Sarah blinked at it, hesitant to take it. "From who?" she asked quietly, voice tight. "The man from your flight," the guard said to make sure only you got it." Keanu. Her fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the envelope. She clutched it to her chest as the officer gave her a small nod and walked away. The crowd around her continued moving, families reuniting, tourists snapping photos, business people rushing to rideshare, pickups. But Sarah felt like time had slowed. She took a seat near the edge of the baggage claim area, a metal bench with scuffed paint and a view of the carousels. She sat Noah beside her, bouncing him gently on her knee as she carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was no letter, just a simple note on folded stationery and something thick tucked behind it. She read the note first. "In case no one told you today, you're brave, you're strong, you're a good mom. You deserve more than just survival. Survive." Her breath caught. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes again. She bit her lip to keep them from falling, but they came anyway. Behind the note was a thick stack of bills. Hundreds, crisp and clean, banded together. She thumbed through it quickly, stunned. $2,000, at least. Sarah looked up, scanning the terminal wildly. Keanu was gone, not even a glimpse. She remembered how quietly he had walked off, how he seemed to disappear into the crowd without leaving a ripple, but he had left something behind all the same. Not just money, not just a list, but something deeper, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things could start turning. She pressed the envelope back together and tucked it into the inside pocket of her baby bag. She pulled Noah close and kissed the top of his head. "Someone out there sees us," she whispered. The carousel buzzed to life, and her bag eventually slid down the conveyor belt. She grabbed it, heavier than before, but somehow easier to carry. There was a new kind of weight now, one she was willing to hold. Outside the terminal, the air felt cooler, fresher. Sarah stepped onto the curb with Noah in her arms and her bags slung over one shoulder. She hadn't made it past the taxi queue when a thought struck her. She pulled out the folded note again, the list Keanu had given her before the plane doors opened. She unfolded it carefully, expecting a few names scribbled in a hurry. But it was typed, detailed, the names of shelters, food pantries, emergency support centers. Each one had an address, hours of operation, and a short description. Safe House Downtown, 24 HR Shelter for Mothers and Children, walk-ins welcome. East LA Family Center, emergency food plus baby supplies. Ask for Lydia. Transit vouchers available at Mission 42, speak to Mark. She stared at the list, stunned at how thorough it was. This wasn't a random pamphlet, this was curated. Someone had done their homework. Keanu had done this for her. She whispered his name under her breath like it was something sacred. She hadn't even known who he was until someone in the terminal mumbled it to a friend near the gate. Was that Keanu Reeves on the plane? Now the pieces connected. The kindness, the quiet generosity, the humility. A part of her wanted to run back inside, find him, thank him properly, but she knew he wouldn't be there. He'd given her everything he intended to and disappeared. She tightened her grip on Noah as a cab pulled up beside her. "Where to?" the driver asked. She hesitated for just a moment, then glanced at the top name on the list. "Safe house downtown," she said. "And I don't have a credit card." The driver tilted his head. "You, sir?" Her eyes widened. "Yes." He smiled. "Your fare's been covered, all the way to wherever that list says." Her mouth fell open. She blinked in disbelief. "Guy said you might be too proud to ask. Told me not to take a dime from you." Her hand covered her mouth as her eyes filled again. There were no words. She climbed into the cab slowly, holding Noah against her chest as he stirred. The driver helped with the bags, then eased into traffic, heading toward the city. As they drove off, Sarah looked out the window, watching the airport fade into the distance. She wasn't just leaving an airport, she was leaving fear, leaving exhaustion, leaving the feeling that no one cared. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't entirely alone. She reached into the diaper bag, pulled out the envelope again, and held it like a lifeline. Then she whispered something to Noah, soft enough only he could hear. "We're gonna be okay now." Sarah sat in the back of the cab, the city slipping past in blurred streaks of light and shadow. Noah had finally fallen asleep on her chest. His tiny hand curled around the edge of her shirt. Her fingers trembled as she reached again for the envelope, the one given to her by a security officer, the one from the man on the plane. She hesitated. Part of her was scared to open it, not because she feared what was inside, but because she was afraid of how it would make her feel. She had spent the last year building emotional walls high enough to survive the pain, the betrayal, and the fear of starting over. But this envelope was kindness in physical form, and kindness had a way of breaking through even the strongest defenses. With a deep breath, she gently peeled back the flap. A small stack of crisp bills met her eyes. She blinked, stunned, pulled them out slowly, counted once, then again, just to be sure. $5,000. $5,000 in clean, unmarked cash, folded neatly and tucked into the bottom of the envelope with a single slip of paper. She unfolded the paper, heart pounding. It was a handwritten note. The penmanship was uneven, clearly written in haste. But the words were careful, simple. "This doesn't solve everything, but maybe it helps for now. You're stronger than you think. Take care of him and yourself." Yeah, that was all. No signature, no publicity stunt, no social media tag. Just words meant for her, words meant to be felt, not flaunted. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Her chest tightened as she leaned forward slightly, hugging Noah with one arm, clutching the letter in the other. It had been so long since someone looked at her and saw a person, not a burden, not a case, not a statistic, just a mother, just a woman trying to make it through one more day. The cab driver glanced in the rearview mirror, then quickly looked away, sensing the moment was private. He didn't say a word. At the next red light, Sarah looked back down at the cash again, then the note. This doesn't solve everything. No, it didn't. It wouldn't fix the trauma. It wouldn't rewrite the past. But it gave her something she hadn't had in months. A beginning. A choice. A breath of air in the middle of what had felt like drowning. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her wallet, close to where she kept a photo of Noah's first ultrasound. Her heart felt cracked open, and somehow more whole than before. The cab continued toward the shelter, and Sarah held her child like a lifeline, whispering promises into the soft curve of his cheek. Not just of survival now, but of hope. Back inside the airport, 2 security officers stood by the arrival gate, their expressions unreadable. They had watched the entire interaction from a distance, just far enough to respect the moment, just close enough to ensure the envelope found the right hands. One of them, a woman named Carla, had worked airport security for almost 15 years. She had seen all kinds of people come through, celebrities, dignitaries, tourists, runaways, but nothing like what she saw that morning. It wasn't just the gesture, it was the silence around it. The way Keanu never asked for acknowledgement. No cameras, no signature reveal, no staff documenting the act. Carla had seen Sarah's eyes when she opened the envelope. That brief flicker of disbelief. Then, the rush of emotion. A young mother brought to her knees, not by fear, but by unexpected kindness. Carla had turned away then, giving the girl her privacy. Moments later, another staff member walked up to her quietly. "You're not going to believe this," he whispered. "What?" "The flight attendant. She saw the whole thing." Carla raised an eyebrow. "She took a photo of him holding the baby. Didn't post it. Just saved it. She didn't even know it was Keanu at first. She just said, 'He looked like a dad.'" Carla nodded slowly, folding her arms. "Feels like something the world should see," he added. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it's enough that she saw it." But the story didn't stay quiet for long. Later that evening, the flight attendant, Rachel, sat on the edge of her hotel bed, the photo still open on her phone, the image blurry but unmistakably real. Keanu Reeves cradling a sleeping baby, eyes calm, protective. A woman asleep on his shoulder, exhaustion written across her face. Two strangers linked by an invisible thread. Rachel hadn't taken the picture to share it. She had taken it because something about that moment felt sacred, something she didn't want to forget. But as she thought about it more, she realized something else. The world had grown noisy, harsh, cynical. Maybe one quiet act of kindness could still cut through the noise. So she posted the photo anonymously. No name, no tags, just a caption. "On a flight this morning. He held her baby so she could rest. He didn't say much, just stayed. I don't know who needs to hear this today, but goodness still exists." She set the phone down and went to bed. By the time she woke up, the post had already been shared 40,000 times. People began speculating. Who was the man? Was it really Keanu? The hood hid most of his face, but those who knew his eyes knew. And those who didn't care about his name still felt the impact. Because the truth didn't need a name. Just a heart and a moment of stillness in a world that rarely stops. Sarah, still seated on the floor near the baggage claim, didn't know anything about a viral photo. She didn't know that people around the world had already begun resharing her moment of despair turned grace. All she knew was the weight of the envelope in her lap, the sleeping child in her arms, and the warmth of a stranger's words echoing in her head. "This doesn't solve everything, but maybe it helps for now. You're stronger than you think." She read it again, her fingers trembling slightly as they ran along the folds of the note. The handwriting wasn't elaborate, just simple, clear, and intentional, like the man himself. It was hard to explain how much it meant. Not just the money, though that alone could change her next few weeks, but the gesture, the timing, the dignity in it. He hadn't treated her like a burden, or a cautionary tale, or a person to be pitied. He had seen her as a mother doing her best, and for a few minutes he had held her world, her baby, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A gentle tap on her shoulder broke her from her thoughts. It was Carla again, holding a bottle of water and a small packet of tissues. "For the road," Carla said kindly. Sarah nodded, accepting them. "Thank you." "I don't know what you've been through," Carla said, "but you're not alone." Sarah bit her lip, trying not to cry again. "It's been a long time since someone said that to me. You deserve to hear it more often." Sarah stood slowly, balancing Noah against her shoulder. The baby stirred slightly, then went still again. Peaceful. She walked toward the exit, each step feeling lighter than the last. She still didn't know where she'd sleep that night, but she had names of shelters, she had food bank addresses, she had $5,000, and she had a note written by someone who believed in her strength when she had nearly none left. Outside the terminal, the air smelled different, fresher, as if the whole city had changed while she was inside. She glanced back just once. No cameras, no media vans. just the sound of a plane taking off above, and somewhere in the crowd of people rushing into the day, a man in a hoodie walking the other way. Quiet, unnoticed, but unforgettable. That night, in a motel room that didn't reek of fear or broken locks, Sarah opened a small notebook and wrote the date, July 14th. And underneath it, she wrote 6 words. I think we're going to make it. Then she turned off the lamp, pulled Noah close, and fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. Far from the noise, far from the fear, cradled not in luxury, but in a moment of mercy. And in the morning, her story would belong to the world, but her hope, that belonged to her now, forever. It started with a single image. A photo posted anonymously on a small flight attendant forum. No hashtags, no tags, just a caption. I saw this on a flight today. A young mom was struggling. He didn't just help, he held her baby like it was his own. No cameras, no crowd, just kindness. The photo was grainy, taken from a respectful distance, but it captured something unmistakable. A woman sleeping against a man's shoulder, a baby in his arms, and the expression on his face. Calm, focused, deeply present. At first, the post received a few supportive comments, people praising the moment, applauding the compassion, speculating about who the man might be. Then someone zoomed in and posted again. Is that Keanu Reeves? That's when it exploded. Reddit threads multiplied, Twitter lit up, Instagram pages with millions of followers reposted it. TikTok creators started narrating the story over lo-fi piano tracks, asking their audiences to reflect on kindness, humility, and what it meant to be human. Within hours, Keanu on a plane trended globally. Some dismissed it as fake news or AI-generated fluff. But then more photos began surfacing. A clearer one, from another passenger in row 18, showed a side profile. The hoodie, the hair, the unmistakable jawline. It was him. No one had even known he was flying commercial that day. No entourage, no first-class seat, just seat 17C. Speculation swirled. Commentators debated the ethics of exposing what was clearly meant to be a private moment. Fans defended his silence. Others flooded his foundation's website with donations in his honor, citing the man who held the baby. And through it all, Keanu Reeves said nothing. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't deny or confirm. His team didn't return calls. His social media accounts remained quiet, untouched. When reporters reached out, they were met with polite refusals. Melt said he doesn't wish to comment. It was as if the silence was part of the story, and somehow that made it more powerful. Meanwhile, miles away from the media storm, Sarah sat on the edge of a bunk bed in a modest women's shelter on the outskirts of the city. Her bags were tucked neatly beneath the mattress. Noah slept in a borrowed crib beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling under a donated blanket. She had taped the note to the wall beside her. It wasn't big or fancy, just a sheet of paper folded once, creased where her hands had clutched it tightly. But to Sarah, it was everything. A reminder that someone had seen her, not just her exhaustion or her poverty, but her effort, her love, her refusal to give up. She read it again before lying down. You're stronger than you think. She believed it now. For the first time in years, she truly believed it. At the shelter, Sarah kept to herself during the first few days. The other women were kind, but she was still raw, still adjusting to safety, to silence, to the absence of yelling in the middle of the night. Noah slept better here. She did too, even if only in small stretches. A counselor named Dana noticed the folded paper taped beside Sarah's bed. One afternoon, she gently asked, "Is that a quote?" Sarah hesitated, then smiled. "It's from someone I met on a flight." Dana didn't press. But later, when news of the viral photo reached the shelter staff, she walked past the bunk again and took a second look. Her breath caught. She'd seen that photo online. The woman resting on the stranger's shoulder. The baby. That woman was Sarah. She didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she printed the story out, left it folded on Sarah's pillow, with a sticky note, "If you ever want to talk about it, I'm here." Sarah didn't need to open it. The headline alone made her chest tighten. The quiet hero on flight 278. Was that really Keanu Reeves? She read the article 3 times. She never told the shelter staff it was her in the photo. Not right away. She wasn't ready. But when she stepped outside that night to make a call to her sister, she spoke with more strength in her voice. I think we're going to be okay now," she whispered, looking up at the stars. Across the internet, the image kept spreading. People began writing their own stories in the comments beneath reposts. My mom once met Keanu at a grocery store. He carried her groceries to her car. I worked at a gas station years ago. He tipped me $100 0 cents and told me not to skip school. Hell remembered my name 3 months after filming. Who does that? The comment sections became a place of shared humanity. Stories not just about Keanu Reeves, but about goodness in unexpected places, about the quiet impact one moment can have when no one's watching. Somewhere in downtown Los Angeles, a film producer read the post aloud to his team during a morning meeting. This is what we're missing," he said, slamming the laptop shut. "We've been so busy chasing clicks, we forgot what real stories sound like." In a high-rise office in Manhattan, a CEO forwarded the image with a subject line, "This is the tone I want in our next campaign." Back in the shelter, Sarah clipped Noah's fingernails with trembling fingers. She wasn't used to planning more than one day ahead. But today, she dared to imagine. Maybe a daycare, a bus pass, a fresh pair of shoes, maybe even a job. All because one stranger looked at her, not with pity, but with belief. And the whole world noticed. The days that followed were surreal. Sarah watched the world react from the quiet corner of her shelter bunk, cradling Noah as headlines multiplied. Baby asleep on his shoulder, Keanu Reeves' act of kindness goes viral. Hollywood star's humble moment inspires millions. Single mom gets help from an unexpected passenger. But no one had her name. No interviews. No doorsteps crowded with reporters. And that's how she wanted it. It wasn't about fame, it was about survival. And someone who had reached out without asking for anything back. The shelter's counselor, Dana, sat beside her during a late-night tea session in the kitchen. "You know," she said, glancing at the photo again on her phone, "sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who feel like they deserve it the least." Sarah blinked slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't even know who he was." Dana smiled. "That's probably why he helped." Meanwhile, in a quiet interview for a podcast about empathy and fame, Keanu was asked indirectly about the moment. The host described the viral photo without using names. Keanu paused for several seconds, then simply said, "Sometimes it's not about rescuing. It's about reminding someone that they still matter." No confirmation, no denial, just a quiet echo of what the world already felt. The internet's reaction didn't stop at likes and shares. Inspired by the story, people began donating to shelters and women's aid organizations. One small shelter in Boise received a $20,000 0 cents donation tagged, "In honor of the mom on Flight 278. Sarah saw the ripple effect and cried again, not because she was the center of attention, but because others like her were finally being seen. She'd printed the article and taped it under her note. Not for validation, but as a reminder that someone had seen her not as a burden, but as a person. Noah stirred beside her in the crib, and she gently rubbed his back. A volunteer knocked softly on her door. "Hey, there's someone from a transitional housing program here. They've got space if you're ready. Sarah's breath caught. She looked around the small room. The safe walls that had held her in her most fragile moment. She tucked the note from the envelope into her bag, not as a keepsake, but as a seed, the beginning of something. As she stepped into the hallway, other women glanced up, smiling. They'd seen the post too. One whispered, "You gave us hope." Sarah paused, turned around and whispered back, "No, he did." And then, with Noah in her arms and the world watching from afar, she walked toward a new beginning. Quietly, bravely, and without fear. The first night in the transitional housing program was quiet. Sarah didn't sleep much, but it wasn't from fear. It was the silence, the strange comfort of clean sheets, and the knowledge that, for once, she didn't have to look over her shoulder. The next morning, she met with a housing coordinator who helped her navigate a series of options. They talked about short-term stability and long-term planning. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in months, Sarah had choices. With the money from the envelope, she made her first bold decision. She found a small room for rent in a shared house not far from the shelter. It wasn't much. A twin bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a door that locked. But to her, it felt like a castle. Noah cooed as she laid out a second-hand crib mat near the window. Sunlight streamed through a curtain that had seen better days, but Sarah smiled as she watched her baby roll onto his back and reach for the rays. That afternoon, she visited a women's employment center and enrolled in a job training program. It was for entry-level office support, something she'd always wanted to try but had never felt worthy of. The intake counselor, a kind woman named Marla, asked about her background. Sarah hesitated, then told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. Marla nodded gently. "We don't care where you've been. We care where you want to go." Sarah swallowed hard. She was still adjusting to being spoken to with kindness. Each week she showed up for her classes. She learned about typing speeds, phone etiquette, resume formatting, and interview skills. She studied during Noah's naps and practiced mock calls into the night. The other women in the class became unexpected friends. Some had stories like hers: domestic abuse, job loss, homelessness. Others had taken different paths but carried the same wounds. In that room, there was no shame, only a quiet understanding that survival itself was a victory. Sarah didn't mention the man from the plane. It felt sacred, private. Sometimes she wondered if she had dreamed the whole thing. But then she'd glance at the folded note tucked into her wallet and remember the handwriting. "You're stronger than you think." She read it again on the nights when everything felt too much, and each time it helped. As days became weeks, she applied for small admin jobs and accepted rejection without breaking. She had a new goal now: security, not just for her, but for Noah. They didn't need a mansion. They needed peace. And thanks to a stranger with quiet eyes and a warm smile, she was finally building a life where peace was possible. She still had no idea who he was. But soon, everything would change. By the second month, Sarah had landed a part-time receptionist position at a dental clinic. It wasn't glamorous, but the moment she held her first paycheck, she wept quietly in the staff restroom. She used it to buy essentials: diapers, formula, a second-hand baby carrier that didn't strain her back. The house manager noticed the change in her. Sarah was walking taller, speaking with a little more confidence. Noah had started babbling new sounds and laughing more often. She'd read that babies could sense the emotional environment around them. If that was true, maybe Noah was finally feeling safe too. Every morning, Sarah pinned the handwritten note above her tiny desk. "This doesn't solve everything, but maybe it helps for now. You're stronger than you think." She had read it so many times that she knew the exact shape of the letters, the faint smudge at the bottom corner, where her tear had landed the first time she opened it. And yet, even now, she still didn't know who the man really was. She hadn't followed the online speculation, hadn't Googled the rumors or joined the forums. The women at the shelter had mentioned something about a story going viral, but she stayed away. She didn't want to break the magic by turning it into noise. But one night, while washing Noah's bottle in the kitchen sink, the TV in the common room played an ad for an upcoming movie. The voices echoed faintly down the hall. "Noah, bedtime," she called softly. He giggled in response, then let out a sudden burst of laughter. Unusual, spontaneous, joyful. Sarah glanced toward the sound, and something caught her attention. On screen was a man in a dark suit, walking slowly down a corridor, rain dripping off his coat. His face turned to the camera. Sarah froze. The profile, the posture, the eyes. Noah clapped as the screen changed to a dramatic logo. John Wick, Chapter 5. Her hands went still in the dishwater. The world seemed to slow. She walked carefully toward the common room, staring at the screen as the preview ended and a talk show host's voice returned. She didn't know much about celebrities, but she knew that face. That was him, the man on the plane. Her knees trembled. She sank into the nearest couch, heart pounding. Noah crawled into her lap, babbling happily. And Sarah, for the first time, whispered the name to herself like a secret. Keanu Reeves. She didn't need to post anything. She didn't need confirmation. She just knew. The quiet man who held her baby, who gave her the money, who slipped her a note without fanfare. He was one of the most famous actors in the world, and he hadn't asked for recognition. He'd simply shown up, helped, and walked away. But the ripple was still unfolding. The next morning, Sarah didn't tell anyone at the shelter. She didn't post on social media. She didn't even bring it up during her support group session. Something inside her told her that this wasn't meant to be shouted, it was meant to be lived. She went to work that day with a quiet fire in her chest. That week, she started studying for her high school equivalency diploma at night. After Noah fell asleep, she'd pull out a workbook and go over reading comprehension and math problems by the faint light of a second-hand lamp. Sometimes exhaustion crept in. But every time she thought about quitting, she remembered the way Keanu had looked at her. Not with pity, but with belief. And that belief was now guiding her steps. Her life was still hard. Some nights, Noah cried for hours. Some weeks, her paycheck barely stretched. But there was a difference now. She had a future again. One Friday evening, as she picked up Noah from the daycare attached to the resource center, a worker handed her a finger painting the toddler had done that day. It was clumsy and colorful, filled with chaotic swirls and smears. But in the corner, a little stick figure held what looked like a baby. And beside it, in the teacher's handwriting, was the caption, "Someone who loves me." Sarah smiled. She pinned the painting beside the note in her small room. The wall was becoming a gallery of hope. On another day, a volunteer offered to give her a ride home. As they waited for the car to warm up, the woman asked, "Do you know who helped you?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Do you think you'll ever reach out to him?" She looked down at Noah, now asleep in his car seat. "No," she said softly. "He didn't ask for thanks. He asked me to believe in myself. That's what I owe him." The woman nodded in understanding. And as the car pulled away from the curb, Sarah knew that this wasn't the end of her story. It was the middle. The rebuilding had begun, not just of her life, but of her self-worth. And all of it had started with a stranger's shoulder, a silent act of kindness, and 5 words that had changed everything. "You're stronger than you think." Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Noah was napping beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan filled the room. A soft afternoon light poured through the curtain, warming the little corner she now called home. In front of her lay the folded note Keanu had written. She read it again, slowly. She knew the words by heart now, but something about seeing them in his handwriting always stirred something deep inside her. This time, though, after folding it back carefully, she set it aside and picked up her pen. She didn't know how to begin. How do you thank someone who changed everything without asking for anything in return? How do you find the right words for a moment that redirected the course of 2 lives? Her fingers hovered above the page. Then, quietly, she began. "Dear Keanu," she wrote, her pen slightly trembling. "I don't know if this will ever reach you. I don't even know if you'll remember me. I was the tired girl with the crying baby on the plane. The one who accidentally fell asleep on your shoulder. The one who was too embarrassed to ask for help and too scared to admit how broken I felt." Tears filled her eyes as she paused to breathe. "But you saw me anyway. You held my baby like he mattered. You let me rest when I couldn't hold on any longer. And then, when I thought our paths were done crossing, you left a gift I'll never forget." She paused, pressing the pen gently to the paper, letting the emotion settle before continuing. "You didn't just give us money, you gave us space, dignity, a moment to breathe, and in doing that, you gave my son something I didn't know how to give him: stability." Sarah wiped her cheek and looked over at Noah. His little hand twitched in his sleep, his fingers curling softly into a fist. She picked up the pen again. "You changed his future and mine." She set down the pen again. There was more to say, so much more, but she needed a moment before she could write it. Sarah folded the letter in half for a moment, pressing it between her palms, then opened it again. Her hand trembled less now. The hardest part, starting, was done. But she wasn't finished. She continued, "I didn't know who you were, not really. I just thought you were a kind man in a hoodie. I didn't see the movie star. I saw someone who understood what it meant to be exhausted and still cared anyway. I think that made all the difference." She looked around the room. It was small, with paint chipping on one wall and a second-hand crib in the corner. But it was safe. She had paid for it with the help he gave. That security allowed her to get a job at a local community center, start training in administration, and even join a support group for women who had survived domestic abuse. That one envelope had become more than a gesture. It had been a turning point. Sarah turned the paper over and continued on the back. "I'm not writing to ask for anything. In fact, I hesitated even sending this. But last night, Noah laughed at a John Wick commercial on TV, and something clicked. I recognized your face. I Googled. My jaw dropped, and then I cried again. Because it all made sense." She reached for a small photo on the dresser. It was one of the few she had taken since getting back on her feet. In it, she stood beside Noah, both of them smiling outside the shelter that had helped her rebuild her life. Her cheeks were full again, her eyes tired but hopeful. Noah was clapping, his cheeks round with joy. She gently tucked the photo inside the envelope and held it for a long time. Beneath the picture, on a small card, she wrote, "You didn't just help me. You changed the direction of my son's life." She added her initials in the corner. Not a signature, just a quiet mark of gratitude. The envelope sat on the table as she sealed it. She looked at it for a long time, breathing in the finality of what she had written. And then, with a steady hand, she reached for the address. She had searched online to find the address of Keanu Reeves's production company. It wasn't hard to locate. What was hard was believing that anyone would actually read her letter once it arrived. But that didn't matter. This wasn't about a reply. It was about closing a chapter, with the same quiet grace that had opened it. Sarah slipped on her jacket, tucked the envelope carefully into her purse, and stepped out into the chilly morning air. She passed other tenants in the hallway, nodding politely. Her breath came in small clouds as she walked to the corner mailbox. Each step echoed the words in her head. "You're stronger than you think." She had repeated those words 100 times in the dark. They had carried her through grocery lines, daycare applications, and long nights working at a job she once felt too broken to handle. She owed her progress to many things: supportive staff at the shelter, her own determination, but the catalyst had been a stranger on a plane who didn't act like a stranger at all. Standing in front of the blue mailbox, she hesitated. This moment felt final, somehow. Not like the end of a story, but the end of the weight she'd been silently carrying. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," then dropped the envelope through the slot. It was done. Back at her apartment, Sarah stared out the window while Noah played on the floor. A quiet peace settled over her. The letter was no longer in her hands, but its meaning would stay with her forever. Across town, in a quiet mailroom at a modest Hollywood office, a clerk would soon find an envelope marked with a child's crayon drawing and a woman's careful handwriting. It wouldn't be flashy, it wouldn't scream for attention, but someone would open it. And somewhere in the days to come, Keanu Reeves would read the letter meant for him. He wouldn't post it. He wouldn't tell the press, but he would fold it into the same leather-bound journal he carried everywhere, the one that already held a baby's drawing and a story he never intended to become public. Because for Keanu, some moments didn't need the spotlight. They only needed to be remembered. The letter arrived quietly, tucked between a few scripts and a small package of books sent by a charity. It bore no official markings, no agent's label, no film pitch summary. Just a simple white envelope with a handwritten name and return address, barely legible through the soft smudge of crayon around the edges. Keanu spotted it late one night after returning from a quiet walk through the neighborhood. His home was dim, warm with the subtle flicker of a single lamp over the kitchen island. He didn't bother turning on the others. The world had been loud that day. He needed the silence. He poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and sorted through the few pieces of mail left in a small wooden tray. His hand stopped on the envelope. Something about it felt familiar. He sat down slowly, placing the envelope in front of him. For a long moment, he didn't open it. He stared at it like one stares at a memory, unsure of what will rise to the surface when it's finally touched. Then, carefully, he opened it. The photo came out first. A young woman, smiling softly, her baby in her arms. Both of them looked peaceful, like they'd finally found air after being underwater too long. There was no dramatic lighting, no professional polish, just truth and tenderness. He unfolded the letter. Her handwriting was neat, but there were parts where the ink had blotted slightly, as if the pen had paused too long or been pressed too hard. Marks that always told more than the words themselves. He read it once, then again, and again. Each time, his eyes lingered a little longer on her closing words. "You didn't just help me. You changed the direction of my son's life." His hand tightened slightly around the page. He exhaled, the kind of long, slow breath that didn't quite feel like relief. It felt like reckoning, like he had just looked in a mirror he hadn't known he needed. He glanced over at the journal resting by the sink, the same one he carried on every flight. The baby's drawing was still inside. Quietly, without a word, he slid her letter next to it. Keanu sat motionless for several minutes, elbows resting on the counter, the photo of Sarah and Noah still in his hand. The kitchen around him remained hushed, almost reverent, like it too had paused to take in the weight of her words. The truth was, he had received letters before. Fan mail, thank you notes, even stories, from strangers who found comfort in something he said during an interview or a film. But this one felt different. This one wasn't about admiration or celebrity. It was about humanity. Raw, simple humanity. He reached for a pen. He opened a fresh page in his journal, flipping past the baby's airplane drawing and his own thoughts scribbled in the margins. Then he paused. What could he possibly write back? He started to draft a note. It began with her name, then a line about how honored he felt. Then he stopped, crossed it out, started again. I'm glad you're safe, he wrote. Then Your courage mattered that day, more than anything I could have done. But after a moment, he scratched it all out again. None of it felt right. Nothing on the page seemed to capture what he truly wanted to say. Because the truth was, her letter hadn't made him feel like a hero. It had made him feel seen. Seen not for his name or face, but for the part of him that still remembered sitting in the dark with grief, loneliness, or quiet regret. He saw himself in her strength, in her decision to get on that plane, in the exhaustion in her eyes, in the softness with which she now held her baby. He put the pen down. Instead of a reply, he turned toward a decision. He wouldn't send words. He wouldn't make a public gesture. He wouldn't pass her name to an assistant with instructions. No, if he was going to honor what she gave him, it had to be real. He leaned back, staring up at the ceiling for a long time. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded to himself. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but he would see her again. And he'd do it in a way that asked nothing of her, expected nothing in return, and respected her journey. Keanu folded the letter carefully and slid it back into its envelope. Then he picked up the photo again. Sarah with Noah in her arms, both of them smiling, though the background was modest and worn. A bed frame without a headboard, a plastic toy on the floor. But their expressions held something priceless. Peace. He placed the photo on the counter and stood up slowly, his joints stiff from sitting too long. It was past midnight, but the decision stirred something in him. A quiet energy. Not the kind that called for cameras or scripts, but something deeper. Something that reminded him of why he ever stepped into a role, why he ever cared to tell stories in the first place. He walked to the window and looked out over the quiet city. Somewhere in that vastness, Sarah was asleep. Maybe Noah was curled against her chest. Maybe they were safe now, truly safe, for the first time in a long while. That thought alone was enough. Keanu turned off the kitchen light and walked through the hall toward the guest room, where an old corkboard hung on the wall. It was filled with scribbled quotes, Polaroids from distant sets, and letters he never quite forgot. He pinned Sarah's letter near the top corner, just beside a decades-old photo of a young girl who once asked him at a charity event, "Do famous people ever get scared too?" Under that pinned letter, he added one final note on a yellow sticky tab. Some of the quietest people leave the loudest echoes. He stepped back, studied it for a moment, and nodded. Then, without saying a word, he went back to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and sat in the dark. No calls were made that night, no interviews arranged, no favors asked. But deep in his mind, a question was forming, not one of rescue, but of return, of presence, of what it might look like months from now to show up not as Keanu Reeves the actor, but as the man who once sat next to her on a plane. Just a man with a memory, a promise, and a quiet hope. The sky over the city was pale and clear the morning Keanu stepped out of the unmarked black SUV. He wore no sunglasses, no hat, and no security followed. Just a long, dark coat and quiet footsteps as he approached the low building nestled on a quiet street corner. Painted in soft pastels, the new Parent Resource Center blended humbly with its surroundings. But inside, it held something extraordinary, something he had quietly helped bring to life. Months earlier, after reading Sarah's letter, Keanu had made a private donation through an alias to a struggling women's shelter network. He asked for no naming rights, no plaques. His only request was simple: create a space where single mothers could breathe, grow, and begin again. Today, he finally came to see it for himself. Inside, the center buzzed with gentle activity. A toddler giggled in the playroom. A counselor spoke softly with a young woman over a tray of tea. Posters lined the walls with job opportunities, legal support information, and colorful drawings from children who had found safety within these walls. Keanu moved slowly through the halls, unnoticed at first. He paused to look at a crayon drawing taped near the front desk. A stick figure woman held a baby under a sun that wore a wide smile. In the corner of the picture, in crooked letters, it read, "This is our home now." He swallowed. Then he turned the corner and saw her. Sarah stood behind a small reception table, organizing intake forms. Her long hair was pulled into a neat braid, and there was a calm confidence in her posture that hadn't been there on the plane months ago. She wore a name badge that read, "Sarah Volunteer Staff." She didn't notice him at first. Keanu took one slow step forward. Her head lifted. Their eyes met. And for a moment, neither of them moved. Sarah's face went pale, then flushed red. Her hand rose instinctively to her mouth, trembling. The clipboard she was holding slipped from her fingers and fell softly onto the desk. She whispered, barely audible, "Oh my God." Tears welled up uninvited as she stepped around the desk, almost afraid to blink in case it wasn't real. Keanu stood still, letting her take the moment for herself. When she finally reached him, she didn't ask why he came. She didn't speak at all. She just wrapped her arms around him tightly and held on. He placed a gentle hand on her back, smiling. "I just wanted to see how far you've flown." They sat together on a quiet bench outside the center, shaded by a small tree planted only weeks earlier. The air was cool and soft, filled with the distant sounds of laughter from the children inside. Sarah wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, still a little overwhelmed. "I thought maybe I imagined everything that happened on that flight. It felt like a dream after." Keanu nodded slowly, watching a breeze stir the leaves. "It was real. I just didn't want to take away from what mattered most, your moment, your path." She looked down, her fingers laced in her lap. "I kept your note. It's still pinned above my bed. On nights I want to give up, I read it again. It reminds me that someone believed I could keep going." Keanu glanced sideways, his voice gentle. "You did more than keep going." Sarah smiled through tears. "I'm working toward my social work certification now, and Noah, he's thriving. He's the happiest baby I've ever met. Every morning he wakes up smiling like the world owes him nothing but joy." Keanu leaned back, his gaze lifting to the sky. "Sounds like his mother." They sat in silence for a while. It wasn't the kind that needed filling. It was the kind that spoke volumes by simply existing. Eventually, Sarah broke the silence. "I didn't know it was you until I saw your face on a movie poster. It took me a moment to believe it. Even then, I thought, no way would a movie star do that." Keanu shrugged lightly. "I'm just a person who happened to be sitting in the right seat at the right time." She laughed quietly. "That's one way to put it." Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I have something for Noah. I thought about toys or books, but then I remembered how quiet your strength was, how you carried so much without asking for anything. So this felt more fitting." He handed her the envelope. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to Noah. Sarah looked up at him, confused. "You wrote him a letter?" Keanu smiled. "Not for now. For someday. When he's old enough to ask where he came from. When he wants to know what kind of world he was born into, and who was there for his mother when she was at her lowest." Her lips quivered as she clutched the letter to her chest. "I don't know what to say." "You already did," Keanu replied, tapping his chest gently. "With how you got up every morning. With how you kept loving him, even when you had nothing left to give." They walked slowly back toward the center, where a small group of kids were coloring on a folding table near the door. Noah was among them, his curls bouncing as he giggled at something another child said. He looked up at just the right moment and spotted Keanu. Without hesitation, Noah toddled forward, arms wide, a squeal of excitement escaping his little mouth. Sarah blinked in surprise. "He remembers you," she whispered. Keanu crouched down and opened his arms. Noah landed in them with the kind of trust only children could give, resting his cheek against Keanu's shoulder, just like that first flight. Keanu held him for a moment, breathing in the simplicity of it all. The weight of this tiny human, the warmth, the small, powerful heartbeat. Sarah stood still, watching, eyes shimmering. A staff member opened the door and smiled, pausing briefly when she realized who Keanu was. But no one rushed for selfies or photos. Word had already spread through the center, not about the actor, but about the man. He was the donor who never left a name, the one who asked for nothing in return. Sarah walked up and stood beside him, her voice soft but clear. "So what do I tell him when he asks someday who you were?" Keanu looked at Noah, then back at her. "Tell him I was just a stranger who got lucky enough to sit beside a warrior." She didn't speak, she just nodded. As they stood there, the breeze picked up slightly, carrying the scent of fresh grass and sidewalk chalk. Keanu handed Noah gently back to her, and this time it felt like something completing rather than ending. He glanced toward the center one last time. "I'll leave you two to it, but I'm always around." Quietly. Sarah clutched the letter in one hand and Noah in the other. "Thank you," she said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with her whole heart in 2 words. Keanu turned and began walking away. No cameras followed, no headlines were written, but something inside that small shelter, a memory, a moment, a truth, would echo for years. Noah looked up at his mother, then at the man growing smaller in the distance. He smiled and waved. Sarah knelt down and kissed his forehead. "Men helped me find my wings, little one, so you could learn to fly." And together, under the wide morning sky, they stepped into the future he had quietly made possible. Keanu didn't leave right away. Instead, he stayed for a while, walking with Sarah through the corridors of the small but vibrant parent center. The space, recently renovated with cheerful murals and sunlight pouring through wide windows, hummed with quiet energy. Children laughed from a playroom at the end of the hall, while young mothers spoke softly in a counseling circle nearby. Sarah guided him from room to room, not as a tour guide, but as someone sharing a piece of herself. This center had become her sanctuary, the place where she'd rebuilt her identity from the wreckage of fear and isolation, the place where she no longer had to apologize for being exhausted or terrified. It was, in every sense, home. In the nursery, Keanu knelt beside a toddler who was busy stacking plastic cups, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. The child looked up, offered him a cup, then went back to building. Keanu accepted the cup with a soft smile and placed it on top of the wobbly tower. The child giggled. Sarah watched from the doorway, arms crossed loosely. "You're good with kids," she said. Keanu stood, brushing off his jeans. "I've always believed kids understand more than we think. They see truth before they learn to doubt it." She nodded. "That's what I've been learning too." Later, in a quiet office tucked behind the kitchen, Keanu met with the director of the shelter. There were no cameras, no fanfare. He asked about their biggest challenges, what they wished they could do more of, and what kept them up at night. The director answered honestly, occasionally glancing toward Sarah, who was now chatting with another mother across the hall. Before the meeting ended, Keanu pulled out a check already written and placed it on the desk. It wasn't for a single donation. It was to set up a long-term childcare scholarship fund in Noah's name. The center's staff froze. Keanu simply said, "This doesn't need to be public. Just use it where it counts." The director looked down at the figure on the check and blinked back emotion. "Mr. Reeves, this will help so many." Keanu didn't flinch. "That's the point." He signed one final form authorizing a recurring donation to continue quietly in the background. No names on plaques, no press release, just action. When he rejoined Sarah outside, near the garden beds where some of the older kids were planting herbs, she turned and smiled. Sarah stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I saw the director crying," she said gently. Keanu shrugged with a quiet smile. "They're doing real work here. I just wanted to support it." She studied him for a long moment. "You didn't have to come back." "I know," he replied, "but some moments in life leave a mark. You, Noah, that flight. It stayed with me." The garden was blooming. Lavender and rosemary sprouted beside tomato vines, tended by tiny hands with plastic trowels. Keanu bent down to admire a sprouting sunflower. A boy beside him announced it was his plant and named it Captain Sun. Keanu nodded approvingly. As they strolled past the community board, Sarah pointed to a pinned flyer for parenting workshops. "I help run those now," she said, with a mix of pride and disbelief. "That's incredible," Keanu said. "You're not just surviving, Sarah. You're leading." She looked down, her eyes misting. "I'm trying. Some days I still feel like that girl on the plane, tired, lost." He stopped walking. "But you're not. You're standing tall now, and so is Noah." They paused as Noah toddled over from the daycare room, cradling a small plastic dinosaur. He looked up at Keanu and lifted it toward him. "Is that for me?" Keanu asked, softly. Noah nodded and pushed it into his hands with a grin. Sarah laughed under her breath. Keanu crouched and held the toy in both hands like it was precious. "Thank you. I'll take good care of it." Sarah knelt next to them and wrapped one arm around Noah. "He remembers you," she said, "even if he doesn't know why yet." Keanu glanced at her. "Maybe one day he'll understand it wasn't about what happened on the plane. It was about what came after." She exhaled shakily. "I didn't think anyone would ever say something like that to me again." "You deserve to hear it every day," Keanu said. A breeze passed through the courtyard. Wind chimes jingled softly near the entrance. Staff passed by, giving Keanu a quiet nod of recognition, not as a celebrity, but as someone who'd seen and honored their work. Later, as they returned inside, Keanu followed Sarah to a small office tucked between the nursery and the food pantry. She opened a drawer and took out a folder labeled Scholarship Fund, Noah's Garden. Inside were photos, applications, and letters from single mothers who had applied for childcare scholarships. Each one told a story of broken homes, of brave decisions, of hope being built from nothing. Keanu flipped through the pages slowly, carefully, as if each paper carried more weight than any Hollywood script he'd ever held. He reached the last page, where a single line was waiting for his signature, a form authorizing a recurring monthly donation to fund all pending scholarships for the next 2 years. He picked up the pen and signed, quietly. No photos, no applause. Just a quiet promise, fulfilled. Sarah stood beside him, her hand lightly brushing his shoulder when he finished. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he said again. "But I wanted to. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are now." Tears filled her eyes. She wrapped her arms around him, and this time it wasn't a thank you. It wasn't surprise or disbelief. It was the embrace of someone who had once been alone and scared, now surrounded by something solid, safe. It wasn't a celebrity moment. It was a human one. They stepped out into the hallway together, where a group of toddlers played beneath a banner that read, "Every child deserves a safe beginning." Keanu looked up at it and smiled. Noah came running around the corner, laughing, his arms raised. Sarah knelt to catch him, and Keanu stepped back, just watching. Watching a life that had once clung to him on a plane, now run free. A few weeks after the quiet reunion, Sarah found herself sitting in a small podcast studio run by the women's shelter. It wasn't flashy or corporate, just 2 donated microphones, a laptop, and a heart-shaped foam board pinned with messages of hope behind her. The shelter director had asked her to share her story, not for fame, but because so many mothers came in feeling invisible. They wanted to hear from someone who had survived it, someone who understood the sleepless nights, the fear of starting over, and the miracle of unexpected kindness. At first, Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to exploit what had happened. It wasn't about clicks or sympathy, but she also knew what it felt like to sit alone with a baby and believe no one would ever care. So, with trembling fingers and a soft voice, she began. She didn't name him, not once. She spoke about a man on a plane, a stranger who gave her 5 minutes of peace, a shoulder when she had none, and a folded note that changed the trajectory of her life. She talked about the shelters, the scholarship fund, and how that one moment of kindness had rippled into 100 others. She didn't dramatize, she didn't embellish, she simply told the truth. Her voice cracked only once, when she recalled waking up on that flight and seeing her son asleep in the arms of someone who held him like he was precious, not a burden. That was the first time I didn't feel like I was failing, she said, tears forming. He didn't solve my life, but he reminded me I had one. When the episode aired, it was meant to be just another segment in a series about rebuilding. The producers didn't even push it to social media right away, but something about it struck a nerve. It started with a few comments from listeners, single moms, nurses, people stuck in airports listening late at night. Then a blogger picked it up, then a local news outlet, then someone uploaded a clip to TikTok, syncing Sarah's voice with photos of shelter children and donated toys. The views began to climb, not because of celebrity gossip, but because the story was human, raw, and real. Within 48 hours, the podcast had been shared thousands of times. By the end of the week, it had been downloaded over 2 million times across platforms. Donations started pouring into the women's shelter where Sarah now worked. Checks, care packages, gift cards, and handwritten letters filled the front office. People from all over the country, some who had never stepped foot in a shelter, were moved by what they heard. A retired teacher from Nebraska donated her savings, saying, "I was Sarah once, no one helped me, but now I can help someone else." A father in Texas wrote, "Listening to this made me realize I never asked my daughter how she survived her divorce. I'm calling her tonight." Shelters in other cities reported a surge in donations and volunteer applications. The story had sparked something much bigger than itself. And yet, Keanu remained silent. He didn't release a statement, he didn't confirm anything, he didn't comment on the podcast or the posts. All he did was listen. That silence became a kind of power. It left the story untouched, untainted by celebrity noise. People began to speculate, of course. Some podcasts tried to analyze his handwriting from old fan mail and compare it to the note Sarah had mentioned. Online sleuths dug into the donation records of the shelter's parent center. There were hints and clues, but nothing ever official. And still, Keanu said nothing. Until one quiet evening, weeks after the podcast had gone viral, when he posted a single line on his nearly dormant social media account. It read, "Some flights change more than destinations." That was it. No hashtags, no tags, no photos, no names, just those 7 words, posted in white font on a black background. Within minutes, the internet erupted. People knew. They didn't need a press release or paparazzi photo to confirm it. The phrasing, the humility, the restraint. It could only be him. And somehow, the mystery made it all the more powerful. He wasn't chasing credit. He was reminding the world that change doesn't always arrive with a spotlight. Sometimes it rides in coach class. Sometimes it wears a hoodie. And sometimes it holds a baby just long enough for a mother to rest. In the days that followed Keanu's quiet post, something remarkable began to happen. Celebrities with far larger followings started sharing links to shelters instead of selfies. Some simply reposted Sarah's podcast episode with the caption, "Listen, that's all." Others echoed Keanu's line, "Some flights change more than destinations," as a quiet nod of respect. But more importantly, ordinary people began sharing their own stories. Women who had fled abuse, single fathers trying to hold it together, flight attendants remembering passengers they once helped or were helped by. The comment sections became digital confessionals, not sensationalized, Not curated, just real people remembering kindness and letting it ripple. Not ripple. Sarah, meanwhile, remained grounded. She was still showing up for work at the center, still changing diapers in the daycare room, still attending her Tuesday night support group. The podcast host had asked her if she would do a follow-up interview, maybe even a short video special, but she had declined. "This story isn't about going viral," she said. "It's about reminding people what kindness feels like when you don't expect it." In private, she did print out the post Keanu had made, the 7 words that had broken the internet in whispers, and pinned it beside the original note he gave her at the airport. Above the crib where Noah now slept, both pieces of paper sat like bookmarks in a story still being written. Noah was older now, more energetic and curious. He'd learned to say thank you in his small toddler voice, and every time he looked at the note, he pointed and said, "Plane man." Sarah would smile, tuck him in, and whisper back, "Yes, baby, the man from the plane." At a gala for domestic violence awareness 6 months later, a board member from the shelter took the stage. She didn't name Keanu. She didn't even mention Hollywood. She simply said, "Sometimes change doesn't come from grand speeches. It comes from the quietest moments, like a mother resting her head and a stranger holding the weight." Applause followed, but there was no need for anything louder. The message had landed. And far away from the cameras, from awards and flashing lights, Keanu Reeves sat in a modest room, scrolling through anonymous donation reports to shelters nationwide. He never commented, never called attention to himself, but he saw the numbers growing, and he smiled, because this flight, this one unexpected moment in time, had changed more than one destination. 2EI. It had quietly, permanently altered lives, and that was more than enough. The idea started as a whisper at the shelter, in one of the quiet moments between crying toddlers and exhausted mothers waiting in line for donated groceries. Sarah had just finished her shift when one of the directors approached her with a proposal. "We've had a surge of donations since the podcast," the woman said. "And, well, your story has moved more people than you realize. Would you be open to something more lasting?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She looked over at Noah, playing with a mismatched set of plastic blocks donated from 3 different families. His tiny fingers worked with focus. His world was stable now, safer. But so many others were not. After a long breath, she finally nodded. The nonprofit launched 3 months later under the name Noah's Flight. It was Sarah's idea, not because she wanted her son to be the center of attention, but because she wanted to honor the moment that changed their lives, the moment she fell asleep, in desperation, and woke up in a different future. The mission was simple: emergency grants for single mothers in crisis. No long forms, no invasive questions, just help, quickly and quietly, for those who needed it the most. The name spread faster than anyone expected. A-list celebrities began donating anonymously, though some of their names inevitably leaked through nonprofit reporting forms. A major pop star reposted the original podcast episode with the caption, "Support Noah's Flight. This is what real change looks like." Within weeks, the organization had gone from a grassroots idea to a nationally recognized relief fund. The board formed a permanent staff. Lawyers donated time to structure it legally. A pro bono ad firm created a short campaign video. But the person everyone wanted to talk to the most remained completely silent. Keanu Reeves declined all requests for interviews, even as his name became permanently associated with the nonprofit. His publicist was bombarded with offers, TV specials, magazine profiles, documentary pitches. But every reply was the same. "Mr. Reeves appreciates the interest. He has nothing to add." He let the story breathe on its own without feeding it with his face. And still, the fund grew. Mothers wrote in from every state, some from hospital rooms, others from battered women's shelters. Every letter started with the same word: thank you. But Sarah knew the truth. They weren't thanking her. They weren't even thanking Keanu. They were thanking the moment that reminded them kindness still existed. The official website for Noah's flight featured no celebrity endorsements, no flashy branding, and no donate now pop-ups. Just a pale blue page with a short mission statement and a photo Sarah had taken herself. A child's paper airplane resting on a park bench, its wings slightly crumpled but still holding shape. That image spoke more than any words ever could. Behind the scenes, the requests kept pouring in. A woman from Ohio who'd lost her job and home in the same week. A mother of twins in Texas whose abusive partner had just been arrested. A teenage mom in Oregon trying to escape gang violence. Each story felt deeply personal, and Sarah read as many as she could. Every night, after putting Noah to sleep, she sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and a stack of letters or emails. Some made her cry, some made her angry. All reminded her that this work mattered. She kept one message framed near her door. It came from a woman in Montana who wrote, "I watched my daughter sleep on the floor of a church for 2 nights until your grant came through. That $300, 0 cents, got us a room. That room got me a job. That job got us our lives back." Sarah taped a handwritten reply to that message and mailed it herself. It wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving people the dignity to breathe again. Meanwhile, news outlets kept chasing the source. Journalists tracked flight manifests and zoomed in on the grainy airplane photo taken by the flight attendant. Some compared the blurry profile with Keanu's past appearances. Others interviewed former shelter staff, trying to confirm whether the story was real. One journalist finally confronted Keanu at a film festival red carpet. "Mr. Reeves, is it true you're the man behind Noah's flight?" Keanu paused, then smiled gently. "I just caught a baby," he said. "She did all the flying." He offered no follow-up, no elaboration, just that. The quote went viral within hours. Every major publication picked it up. It became a meme, a poster, a tattoo on someone's arm. But for Keanu, that moment wasn't about internet culture. It was about protecting a promise. He had always believed that when kindness becomes a headline, it stops being kindness. That the quiet gesture, the one nobody sees, carries more weight than a stadium full of praise. And so he stepped back again, letting the non-profit shine in its own light. Months after its launch, Noah's flight became more than a charity. It grew into a movement. With Sarah as its heartbeat, the nonprofit added programs for legal aid, job placement, and trauma healing. Former recipients returned as volunteers. Single mothers found a safe space, not just for survival but for growth. Major donations came in quietly. One large gift arrived with no signature, routed through an obscure trust. But the staff knew. It matched the week Keanu had dropped by unannounced, sitting quietly in the back row of a parenting workshop. He didn't speak, he just listened, then left. When the organization was honored with a humanitarian award, Sarah was invited to speak. Standing before a packed auditorium, she held the crinkled note Keanu had once left for her. Words that had changed her life. "This doesn't solve everything," she read softly, "but maybe it helps for now. You're stronger than you think." She paused. The room was silent. "I wasn't just given money," she continued. "I was given dignity. Someone looked at me and said I was worth saving. That changed everything." Tears filled many eyes. Afterward, a little girl hugged Sarah's legs. Her mother whispered, "We were one of the first families you helped." Sarah knelt down and smiled. "Then promise me one thing. Keep going." The note was eventually framed and hung in the Noah's flight office. No signature, no celebrity mention, just one quiet truth. You're stronger than you think. The morning of Noah's 5th birthday began with sunlight streaming through the curtains of a small but cheerful apartment. Balloons clung to the ceiling, and a homemade cake sat waiting on the kitchen counter. Sarah stood at the stove, flipping pancakes in the shape of tiny airplanes, just as Noah had asked the night before. He was bouncing around the living room in his pajamas, pretending to fly. A cardboard box had become a cockpit. His laugh echoed off the walls, joyful and unburdened. It was a sound that still made Sarah's eyes well up, even after all these years. 5 years ago, they had landed in that city with nothing but a worn diaper bag and a stranger's kindness. Now Noah was healthy, spirited, and loved. He had no memory of that flight, no memory of crying in her arms as she silently fell apart at 30,000 feet. But Sarah remembered every second of it. There was a knock at the door just as she set the table. Noah shouted, "Mail!" and ran over in socked feet. Outside was a single envelope with no return address, tucked carefully under the mat. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, precise, simple, with just one word: Noah. Sarah's heart skipped. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, thick and textured. A child's airplane was drawn in blue pen. Looping through clouds, smiling, its wings extended wide. Below it, a short message in familiar handwriting. "And won't remember the flight, but maybe he'll remember what came after. Ah. Okay." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. The note was brief, but it carried the weight of years. Her eyes filled with tears. She sat on the couch, the paper resting in her lap as she stared at Noah, who was now chasing balloons with a plastic spoon, oblivious to the world that had shifted again in the quietest way. Noah wouldn't remember that flight, but Sarah would make sure he remembered the story, and this letter, like the one from 5 years ago, would never be lost. Later that day, after the cake had been cut and little friends had gone home, Sarah found herself alone in the living room. Noah had fallen asleep mid-story, his head resting against her shoulder, a soft blanket wrapped around him. His toy airplane still lay nearby, its nose peeking out from under the coffee table. She walked to the corner where 2 simple frames hung side by side. One held the first note, the one handed to her by a security guard on that unimaginable day. The other now held the birthday drawing, freshly pressed, still smelling faintly of pen ink and warm paper. Together, they told the story of a stranger's quiet act of grace and the life that unfolded because of it. Sarah traced her fingers over the words. "You're stronger than you think, and now, maybe he'll remember what came after." It was like a thread had stretched across time, binding moments that had once felt fragile and fleeting into something permanent, something sacred. She thought of all the times she had nearly given up, the sleepless nights, the job interviews where she'd held back tears, the judgmental glances from people who couldn't see the bruises she had left behind, the ones inside. And then she thought of the small victories. Noah's first real laugh, the day she got her first paycheck, the first time she paid rent without fear. And in the background of every one of those moments, whether directly or not, was the man who had once held her son in the sky and asked for nothing in return. She wondered where he was now, what he was doing, whether he ever thought about them. But then again, maybe this letter was his way of saying he never stopped. Sarah sat back and looked at the wall. The 2 notes, the 2 turning points. They weren't reminders of rescue, they were reminders of possibility. Not because someone saved her, but because someone believed she could save herself. And that belief had become the air beneath her wings. That evening, Sarah carefully lifted Noah from the couch and carried him to bed. His small body melted into her arms, heavier now than years ago, but still so light in her heart. She tucked him in and gently placed the toy airplane on the nightstand beside him. Then she stood there for a long moment, watching him breathe peacefully, his lashes fluttering against flushed cheeks. In the quiet, her eyes returned to the letter. She remembered how, for so long, birthdays had brought dread. They were reminders of time slipping away, of growing needs and shrinking means. But not this one. This birthday had brought a letter, a drawing, a sign that the journey they were on still mattered to someone else, someone who had once seen a struggling mother, not with pity, but with faith. And now, that belief was being passed down to Noah, whether he understood it or not. Sarah sat down at her desk and opened her journal. She began to write, not to Keanu, not even to Noah, but to herself. A quiet affirmation. We survived. We grew, and we're still growing. She paused, then wrote one more line. Kindness doesn't fade, it echoes. Outside the window, the wind stirred faintly through the trees. The moonlight cast long shadows across the small apartment floor, touching the framed letters on the wall. They glowed gently in the dark, like lighthouses. Silent, steady, and strong. Sarah stood again and walked back to Noah's room. She knelt beside him and kissed his forehead. "Sweet dreams, my pilot," she whispered. As she turned out the light, she felt something lift inside her, a quiet strength that had carried her through years of storms. It had all started with one act, one man, one shoulder on a plane. Now, the story wasn't just hers. It belonged to the child sleeping peacefully across from her. It belonged to the next mother who would find hope in a shelter, and the next letter, written in love. And tomorrow, as always, she would rise, stronger, braver, and forever grateful. The ripple of one quiet act began to reach corners no one expected. Months after Sarah's story surfaced through podcast clips and anonymous retellings, a young assistant director named Lena heard it while breastfeeding her newborn in a cramped break room between takes. The podcast episode moved her deeply, not because of who it was about, but because of who it could have been her. Any mother juggling dreams and diapers. That night, Lena wrote an email to her studio head, raw with honesty. She shared what it was like to pump milk in janitor closets, to miss her child's first laugh because of a 12-hour shoot, and then she linked the episode. The story of a woman named Sarah, who boarded a plane with nothing but a baby, a diaper bag, and hope. 2 weeks later, the studio quietly announced a new policy: on-set childcare for cast and crew members. No press release, no PR spin, just a memo with a line that read, "No one should have to choose between creating art and raising a child." Word spread fast. Other production companies followed, first with pilot programs, then permanent facilities. Trailers once used for makeup were retrofitted into playrooms. Actors arrived with strollers. Directors cradled their babies between takes. For the first time, motherhood didn't feel like a career-ending condition in Hollywood. It felt like something understood. Sarah knew none of this at first. She was focused on building a small life with Noah, walking him to preschool, cooking dinners, learning how to sleep without fear. But eventually, one of the shelter's caseworkers sent her an article. The headline read, "Hollywood Moms Thank Mystery Flight Story for Industry Shift." Sarah blinked. Below it was a photo of a set, brightly lit and filled with toys, beanbags, and toddlers running barefoot, while their mothers rehearsed lines just outside. She stared at the image, then slowly smiled. It wasn't her face in the article, not Noah's either, but she recognized the spirit. The quiet dignity of a woman doing her best, finally being seen. And somewhere beneath it all, the invisible thread traced back to that flight. The impact didn't stop at studio lots. A screenwriter named Mallory Grant, known for her gripping indie dramas, found herself haunted by the image of a woman falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder, clutching her baby. It stayed with her, long after the podcast ended. She started scribbling at 2 a.m., just a few sentences. A young woman escaping a violent past. A red-eye flight. a mysterious man in the next seat. The idea felt real, human, not another over-dramatized script, but something intimate and grounded in truth. By spring, the script had a name, 30,000 Feet. It wasn't marketed as based on a true story, though insiders whispered that it was inspired by the Keanu flight. The lead character was named Mara. The baby? Eli. No names matched, but the heart did. The film premiered quietly at a festival in Colorado. It didn't have explosions or plot twists. Just a woman on a plane, a moment of kindness, and everything that came after. Audiences left in tears. Critics called it a whisper that becomes a roar. One reviewer wrote, "This isn't a film about rescue. It's a film about recognizing the hero in someone before they recognize it in themselves." When the cast was asked who inspired the roles, they kept it vague. The director only said, "It's about all the people you never hear about. Mothers, survivors, the people holding it together with duct tape and love." The film didn't win awards, but it didn't need to. People watched it, and then they acted. More donations flowed into parenting shelters. One airline even announced a new travel grant for single mothers relocating due to domestic violence. The grant was titled Flight 227, a nod to the number referenced in the podcast episode. Sarah heard about it from a neighbor at the shelter who handed her a flyer. She looked at the headline, eyes welling up. Even now, she still hadn't spoken publicly. She hadn't written a book or started a blog. She didn't want attention. But her story, just by existing, just by being true, was being told over and over again in ways she never imagined. Months later, at a quiet theater in downtown Los Angeles, Sarah sat alone in the back row, watching 30,000 Feet on screen for the first time. The film moved slowly, deliberately, never rushing to force emotion. But when the baby nestled against the stranger's chest and the mother finally let herself sleep, Sarah couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled, not because it was her, but because it could have been anyone. She waited until the credits finished. The small audience clapped politely. A few lingered, wiping their eyes. Sarah stayed until the lights came up. Then she slipped out unnoticed, holding something in her heart she couldn't quite name. Across the city, Keanu Reeves had also seen the film, alone, at home, late at night. He didn't cry. He just sat with it, let it settle. He didn't reach out to the filmmakers, didn't mention it in interviews, but he did send a small anonymous donation to the director's next project, along with a single typed sentence on the receipt. "Thank you for honoring the flight." In a studio meeting weeks later, a young producer suggested expanding on-screen childcare options. He cited the film as proof that stories like Mara's mattered. No one argued. The industry, long known for its glamour and excess, began to pivot, quietly, slowly, towards something softer, not because it was trendy, but because somewhere in the back rooms and early flights, people had seen what dignity looked like, what unspoken help could mean. And Keanu, still never confirming his role in the original story, kept doing what he always did, moving through the world gently, offering what he could, never needing applause. Sarah went back to work at the parent center the next morning. No press, no photos. Just a toddler named Noah clinging to her leg and a stack of intake forms needing signatures. But on her desk, right beside her nameplate, sat two framed notes. One written mid-flight, the other 5 years later. Between them, an entire life had changed. And the world, though it didn't know it, had quietly changed with it. It was late evening. The sun had dipped low, casting golden shadows across Keanu Reeves' backyard as he stood quietly near the edge of the garden. The air was still, just the hum of distant traffic and the soft rustle of wind through the leaves. In his hands, he held two pieces of paper, both old, worn at the edges. One was the first note he'd written, scrawled in a moment of instinct and compassion. The other was the photo Sarah had sent with her letter. Her arms wrapped tightly around her son, their faces glowing with the kind of peace that only comes after surviving something unbearable. He didn't read the note again. He didn't need to. He remembered every word. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the farthest. That thought echoed in his mind, not as a boast, but as a truth he'd seen play out again and again. People didn't always need a miracle. They needed a moment, a hand held out, a voice saying, "You're not alone." He had given that without expectation, and it had traveled so far, through Sarah, through Noah, through every mother who had walked into that center and found a safe place to begin again. He'd never imagined a simple flight would become the start of something like this. The sky dimmed further, turning lavender. In the quiet, Keanu tucked the photo back into the drawer of his outdoor writing desk, where he kept other things that mattered but didn't need display. He looked up, breathing in the stillness. That night, across the city, at the parent center, Sarah sat on the floor with Noah in her lap and 3 other toddlers scattered around them. Another mom, tired but smiling, passed her a cup of lukewarm coffee. The walls were covered in crayon drawings and sticky stars. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. And in that moment, that was everything. The next morning, a quiet post appeared on Keanu Reeves' rarely used social media account. Just a single sentence. No tags, no photo, no fanfare. Some flights change more than destinations. The post didn't mention Sarah. It didn't mention Noah, or the center, or the fund. But those who had followed the story, those who had felt moved by the anonymous acts of kindness, knew exactly what it meant. Within minutes, the comment section filled with stories. People from across the country, and even the world, began sharing their own moments. A soldier remembered being handed a bus ticket by a stranger after missing a connection home. A nurse shared how someone left diapers and formula at her door when her husband had walked out. A teenager recounted an old man giving him shoes on a freezing winter day. Every story different, yet the same. Small gestures, big changes. And then came the photos. A woman posted a framed note that said, "You're stronger than you think." Another shared a crayon drawing of an airplane, just like the one Noah received. Some were new, others had been kept for years. Kindness, it seemed, had always been traveling quietly, just waiting for someone to shine a light on it. And now, thanks to one flight, one mother, one baby, and one man who never asked for recognition, the light had finally reached those corners. At the shelter, Sarah stood by the window as donations began arriving again. Diapers, strollers, books. A small handwritten envelope containing 5 $20 bills and a note that read, "For the next mom who needs to fly." She smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. She knew Keanu would never stand in front of a camera and claim any of this. But that didn't matter, because the people who needed it most, they already felt it. A year later, a quiet celebration took place at the shelter. No red carpet, no headlines. Just a potluck dinner, paper streamers, and laughter that filled every corner of the newly painted walls. Sarah held Noah in her arms, now a talkative and curious 6-year-old who kept asking why everyone had cake on a Tuesday. One of the newer moms, a teenager named Elise, leaned over and whispered, "You were the mom on the plane, right?" Sarah nodded gently. Elise smiled. "Your story is why I came here. I heard the podcast. I thought, maybe someone would believe in me, too." That night, after everyone had gone home and Noah had finally fallen asleep on a blanket beside the community bookshelf, Sarah took a moment to sit in the quiet. She looked at the framed notes on the wall. The first from the flight, the second from the birthday, and now the third. A thank you letter from another mother she had helped mentor. What started with exhaustion and spilled formula had turned into a movement that stretched far beyond one flight. Kindness had taken root, and now it grew not because of one man, but but because he chose to believe in one woman who needed it most. To our audience watching now, have you ever been helped by a stranger in your hardest moment? Share your incredible story in the comments. Your words might inspire someone who's struggling right now. And if you believe that kindness, even in its quietest form, can change lives forever, subscribe to this channel for more incredible stories just like this one. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the course of someone's life is a shoulder to rest on, and the courage to offer it.